All right, so yeah, so midterms are graded. Midterms were good. I was pretty happy with what people did on that. A few issues here and there. I posted comments for each question. I did not record grades on the questions themselves in the Canvas quiz, okay? So you have a comment block that should list, what was taken off on each question and so on, and then a grade recorded. And so look at those, and if you have any questions, definitely come and talk to me. There were a few cases where it looked like people were getting kind of tripped up, going off in the wrong direction, especially on the linked list question. So if you're not sure what was going on there, definitely talk to me. Okay, I think everybody is like pretty close, if not there already, but we're gonna keep going deeper with objects and object-oriented design. So if it's feeling a little iffy or something, let's chat during office hours, or an email or something, and make sure that everything's squared away. I'm still seeing some wiggle room in how people go through something like a linked list, and let me give you an option here. This is not the only way to do it, but for example, suppose you want to go through a linked list and your list is comprised of nodes, and your nodes have integer data, and you just want to add up the data in each node. Okay, there's always the possibility that the list is empty, in which case the header that you're passed could be null. So before you do anything like header.next or header.data, you got to make sure header is not null. Otherwise, you risk getting a null pointer exception. Um, so here's an example. Let's just make a method that gets the header of a linked list and goes through and adds up all the data, right? So I could set a sum equal to 0. Um, so in my mind, I'm going to use header as a temporary variable which points to the node that I'm about to add to my running sum. So I can test for null at the same time that I control my loop and just say, well, header is not equal to null. And if it's not null, then header actually exists. It's a viable node, and so what do? I can just say sum equals sum plus header.data, and then move to the next node. Right? And I know these won't give me, my null pointer exception because I already checked to see if header's not null. And my mental picture is header starts off at that first node. I'm going to add its data, and I'm going to change header to point to the next node. I'm going to come up here, it's not null, I'm going to add its data. I'm going to change header to point to the next node. I'm going to come up here, it's not null, so I'm going to add its data. And then header is going to point to null. That's going to kick me out of my loop, and I've added my 3 pieces of data. I can just return right there. Right? There's a typical method for traversing through a linked list without a sentinel node. And so edge cases are always tricky, right? I saw a lot of code where people were either skipping the first node because they started off with header equals header.next, or they were skipping the last node because they said, well, header.next is not null, which means your last node never gets processed because this node's next is null, but there's still a piece of data in here to deal with, right? Or they didn't do this check until later on, like at the bottom or something, and then they risk the null pointer exception. So if you can pick one of these things, a linked list, a tree, a stack, something, and really work it until you're absolutely 100% confident that I can write this code and this will count every node, it won't go too many or too few, and it won't throw a null pointer exception, right? that will morph into similar confidence with other structures, right? So lists are one of the easier structures compared to trees and things like that. It's a good one to really kind of like drill down into, and make sure you're confident about that, because you'll be doing lists, for the next 2 years probably, in other courses. So it's worth digging further into that. The other comment on the question where you were reading from standard in, scanners come with a pair of methods, has next and next, right? Which will read white space separated tokens. Right? Now, a number of people read a line at a time and then split it up and did some processing based on that. Some people did their own sort of regular expression processing by looking character by character. That's making your life harder, okay? Scanner is a very rich class. It has all of these ways for processing input, and one of them, probably the most basic one, is just next, which says give me the next token, stuff separated by white spaces. So if you use that, then that question was fairly short, the code you had to come up with for it. All right, so take a look at my other comments if you like, and if you have any questions, get in touch with me and we'll go over them. Any questions on the midterm or on PA3 or Eclipse or anything else? So I don't remember where exactly we left things off because it was Thursday last time we did a lecture. But we were playing with Eclipse, and I think the first time I did this, Eclipse was crashing all over the place. And I fixed it that afternoon, but I don't know if that was Thursday or Wednesday. So anyway, I am using Photon, okay, as the Eclipse that seems to work well. So if you go to Eclipse download, go to download packages, go to more downloads and find Photon 4.8. Okay, these ones all crashed for me. I'm guessing the other ones might have also, so I went to Photon. Photon seems stable. If a newer version works for you under Windows or on your Linux, that's fine. But I'm pretty sure Photon will work, okay? And don't do the first one, that's for Enterprise Edition. Do Eclipse IDE for developers, and I just did 64-bit for Linux. You can do the same for other systems. And that seems to work well. So let me run with that. So it's in my download area. And I'll close out the welcome screen. And I've already done some playing around in here. Okay, so our goal this week is to get you started on PA4. All right, so I'm going to spend today and tomorrow going through more stuff in Eclipse, looking at the swing class, figuring out how we place widgets, how we interact with events, and sort of moving towards this event-focused mindset, okay, interrupt-driven code. That's going to take us into stateful programming where what your methods do is not always the same. Okay, you'll call a method and one time it'll do one thing, another time it'll do something different. And what it's going to do depends on what's happened in the past, okay? This is what I call stateful programming. So we're going to get into that, and we're going to move towards Wednesday talking about PA4, okay, which will be a graphical program. You're going to write a game called Dots. So if you don't know how to play Dots, you'll learn how to play Dots. And that may get leveraged into PA5. I haven't decided yet. Okay, so let's mess with Eclipse. And the other thing on Eclipse is apparently under Linux, your choice of window manager makes a difference. And so when I was trying to do this last week, I was finding this anomaly where you'd place down a button and it wouldn't be quite where it was supposed to be. And that apparently is from the choice of window manager. So I made some comments in the posted video, the one labeled Director's Cut. about what I did to get rid of that anomaly. Um, so install new software, right? Go down here. I'm just going to do Photon, and if I take this off, right? What we wanted was swing, and you want basically swing designer documentation. Okay, they're already installed on my system. I think, yeah. But if you've got a new installation, you'll want to check those two and install them. That seems to be all that you need. Okay, and then it gives you the ability to create JFrames and so on. I'm going to install something else in here. Don't think I can do it. Let me see if I can do it from here. So we'll go to Photon. Let's see if VWrapper is available here. I don't think it is. Okay. So I'm going to go to VWrapper on SourceForge. VWrapper is a VI plugin for Eclipse. So come to VWrapper, SourceForge. Click and drag the install button over to your Eclipse window, and that will let you install it. Accept whatever bizarre license terms they ask. Trust the unknown source if you trust it, and then restart Eclipse. Alright, you don't need to do this, but if you like VI, this will be more efficient. So let's start a project. I'll just call it morning. And I'll make a class and I'll call it main, and I'll put in a public static void main. And now I have a VI environment. And if you hate VI, then this is horrifying to you. But if you like VI or you don't mind it, right? For me, it lets me do more than moving around with the mouse and clicking and cutting and pasting and that kind of thing. One note, depending on how much you use VI, you may need to disable some built-in shortcuts. For example, Control D should move me down half a page, but by default, Control D is a delete option. So if I go to Window Preferences and I say Shortcuts, I can come to Keys, and I can find all of my shortcuts. I can sort by binding. And find the ones that I want to get rid of. So Control D is for delete line. I can unbind that. And in the console, Control D is end of file. I still want that one there. Control F I'm going to keep because that's hardwired in my brain. And I think the other ones, Control J, I'll get rid of because that's how I join lines. Control L is how I refresh the screen. And I think the others are probably Control U is up. I'll unbind that. And I should be good to go. Alright, so now I can control down, control up. Alright, so that's just customization. There's other ways you can customize this environment. Right, so while I'm typing, it is putting out suggestions for me. Sometimes that's handy, sometimes it's not. Okay, right, I can click this and it will fill in what I'm typing. Also, when I type a left parenthesis, it creates a right parenthesis. When I type a double quote, it creates another double quote, and so on. those trip me up. They may work fine for you, but you can go to preferences, and all your preferences, you know, there's tons of preferences that you can set, but you can search for things. So I'm going to search under Java editor. I'm looking for the word completion. So I'm going to get rid of insert single proposals. I'm going to get rid of fill method arguments and show guest arguments. I'm going to get rid of all of that stuff. I'm going to leave that. I'm going to do matching, and under Java editor, I'll get rid of bracket highlighting. And anyway, so you can do this. You can spend some time, you know, not when you're like under the clock and trying to, you know, finish up for some deadline. But when you've got time, you can come in here and you can mess around with this stuff and set it to how you like. Okay. And I'm not hitting all of them, but I'll tweak it later on. That's close enough for now. Okay, so I'm still leaving these on. I didn't get rid of those. Alright, so we can run this and, you know, it runs as usual. So lots of customizing you can do. Okay, so let's jump back into Swing stuff. So I'm going to close this project. I'm going to delete this project. I'm going to delete it on disk as well as in here, and let's start a new project. I'll just call it graphics stuff. Alright, and I'm going to start with a JFrame. Okay, anytime we're doing a graphical thing, our main program is actually going to be in a class that creates a JFrame, and the JFrame is where we're going to do all of our drawing. So I'm going to come down to New, and I'm going to say Other, and I'm going to scroll down to where it says Window Builder, expand that, come to Swing Designer, and then you'll have a bunch of options. Let's just say JFrame. And I'll call it Mainframe. And there's my basic code, right? And as we've seen, if we run this, we get a frame. Alright, so if we go to the Design panel, we can drag and drop things. We can change the size of this by just dragging a corner, and so on and so forth. Alright, so there's properties, right? So here's the properties for this JFrame. There's also a content pane in here. The JFrame up here has these properties, so I can say do nothing when I close it, or exit when I close, and so on. So we'll leave that at exit. And remember, you can click this button and see advanced properties, which let you set more things about the appearance and so on and so forth. Alright, so we want to drop widgets into here, and again, for first time through, I recommend putting a layout manager in here for absolute layout. Right now it's using what's called a border layout. Okay, we can change that to absolute. And if I take a button and I drop it somewhere, the button should stay right there. And it lets me type a title in. So I'll say, maybe it doesn't. Alright, so one thing I've not gotten rid of is the first time you do this, the first time you drop something or make a change to the appearance of your frame, it seems like it hangs. And I'm just going to let this go for a minute, and then I'm going to close it out and restart it. And I believe it will work flawlessly after that. But let's close this. We'll say go ahead and save. We'll restart Eclipse. Alright. Alright, so there's our button B1. It even paid attention to what I was typing. Alright, we'll put a second button down here. This is number 2. And we'll put a text field up here. And put some text in there, and I can resize these components to whatever dimensions I want. I can resize my buttons, make button B1 big, and so on and so forth. Okay, so basic drag and drop. Okay, you can drop checkboxes, and a checkbox, right, when you're running, you can click it to check, you can click it to uncheck. Okay, a text field you can type in, you can edit, and so on. Buttons you basically just click. So you can spend a while just playing around with the different widgets that are available. Radio buttons are fun. So here's button 1. I broke my Eclipse again, man. It's supposed to work fine after the first crash. I'm just going to leave that up in the background there. Alright, so there's a button B1. Let's make another radio button. We'll call it B2. And we'll make one more radio button. We'll call it B3. Oh man. So while this is crashing, who knows what radio buttons are and why they're called radio buttons? No idea where the name comes from. Anybody know? Do you know what radio buttons are? Radio, the second one. Yeah, exactly. They're like checkboxes, but you can only choose one. When you choose one, any other that you chose will go away. And if I just drop 3... Yeah, they used to have these things called radios, exactly. Car radios in particular, right? And they had physical push buttons, and it was set up so when you pushed one button, the other button that you had pushed before would get unpushed. It would physically come back out of the bank of switches. And this was how you selected one radio station versus another. And they were really cool devices because you could dial a station you wanted, and then pull the button out extra far, push it back in, and that would program it. It would mechanically record where the dial was, and then when you push that button in, it would switch the dial to that location. And they were set up so you could only push one button at a time. So they're still called radio buttons. Yeah, super old school. Really good memories there. So radio buttons should not let you do this, right? They should let you only pick one at a time. So in Swing, if you want to do this, you have to make one more change. So right click on this button and say Set Button Group. And let's make a new group. Let's crash Eclipse though while we're at it. Okay, good. So this is in a group now called Button Group. And I can right click on B2 and I can say set that in the same button group, and I can right click B3 and say set that in the same button group. So now all 3 of these are in the same group, and now when I run this I can select one, but if I select another, the other one will go off. So now they're truly radio buttons. So this is nice when you have options, like do you want option A, B, or C, and the person can choose one and it will unchoose their previous choices. So we have lots of widgets to choose from. We have toggle buttons. And a toggle button is like a sticky push button. So when you click it, it goes dark saying it's pushed. When you click it again, it gets unpushed. As opposed to these, which are momentary buttons, right? Push and release right away. I think we looked at the password text area. Which is really tiny. Let's make this bigger. So password text area is like, you know, this area that you can type in, but when you type up here, it hides your characters. It gives you feedback that you're typing. And you know, again, all of these have properties. So my password area, for example, I can come down and I thought I could set it. Oh, you can change like what the echo character is. So if you want to display an X instead of a dot, right, you can do that. So spend some time, right? You can read all the documentation on these, but they're really fun to just sort of mess with. When you get to spinners and things like that, those you probably need to do some digging into the documentation. But you know, basic buttons, things like that, they're sort of what you would expect. Okay, so we can place these things, we can move them around. If you're using an absolute layout, you get some you know, help. So it's showing you these guidelines that pop up and disappear to help you line things up. Let's put our toggle button in line with our other buttons, and let's bring this down and line it up with that button, and so on, right? So that's the first thing, is laying these things out. And an absolute manager, right, your components are placed with absolute XY coordinates, and that's it. So if your window is small, your components become invisible, and so on. Now some of these other managers, like the flow layout, right, will let you place components, and as you change the size of the window, the components will move around, right? So I might set up a set of components like buttons to go across, but if my window became too skinny, my third button might pop down here. Okay, and again, you can spend a lot of time messing with layout managers. Depending on what you're doing, what you want the user experience to be, different layout managers make sense. All right, and of course, you know, you can spend lots of time messing around with font colors and background colors and patterns, and you can load icons in for the background of these objects, and so on and so forth. And they also, the properties of these objects are things that you interact with in code. For example, button B1 is called button B, right? That's the variable name. This is what class that object is. It's a J button, right? Button number 2 is called button number. New toggle button is called toggle button new toggle button, and that's an object of type J toggle button. And again, as we drag and drop, we get a bunch of code written for us. So this is all stuff that was generated by Window Builder, right? So here's where we created a password field. Here's where we changed the echo character to be an X instead of a dot. Here's where we set the size, and here's where it's got added to the content pane, the J panel, right? Here's the 3 radio buttons, and you can see they all belong to the radio button group called button group, right? And button group was probably created up here somewhere. Right up here, button group was created as an object of type button group, right? And it's marked as final. So be really careful editing this code by hand, because every time you go to design, what happens? Window Builder reads this Java code and creates this visual presentation of it. So if I come in here and I do something like, let's change radio button B2 to you know, best button ever. and I come back to my design window, right, this has been changed based on the code. So if you make sort of nominal changes in here and you're very careful, things will still work. But if you do something too heavy-handed in here that it doesn't understand, it will no longer be able to render this view for you. Okay, you'll get this annoying internal error. And that can be hard to fix. So generally, don't tinker with the code that got created for you. Okay, if you want to change something, you're safest changing it in here. If you want to change the text field for something, you know, change it in the properties. But again, experiment, right? All this stuff, the more comfortable you are with it, the more successful you'll be using it. And I don't want you to be afraid of this code, right? This is code that you can understand each line of this code if you work through the documentation. But you can probably understand most of it just by guessing, right? You know, what's going to happen if I change this? If I change this 70 to a 700, right, on button B1, my button just got ridiculously big, right? If I go to my design window, I've got this really tall button here, right? And why is that? Because the bounds go up to, you know, 700. I think it was 70. There, so that looks more normal again. All right, so that's basically, you know, dragging and dropping and laying things out, looking at their properties, seeing some of the code. So let's start interacting with these things. Okay, so all of these widgets, including the content pane itself, you can right-click, and you have this option for Add Event Handler. Okay. So one event handler is that you'll always see is action performed. And what action performed means depends on the object. Okay. For a button, action performed means I clicked it. Okay, so I can go here and I can come down to a set of code which gets created by Window Builder, right? And it's adding an action listener, right? And it's constructing that action listener right here, and inside here I can do something like print line button clicked. So if I run this and I click B1, I get text saying button clicked. So I'm firing code in response to an event, okay? And this is the fundamental nature of everything we're going to do when we're making GUIs. It's going to be event driven. And this is a different way of thinking about programming, okay? It's not going to be the case that we sit in a loop and ask, is the button pressed, is the button pressed, okay? We're going to basically go off and do nothing but set things up so that when a button is pressed, we suddenly end up running a piece of code. Okay, now buttons are easy. If you double click a button, left double click in the design window, it'll also do the same as saying add code for action performed. And when we call these action listeners, we get an event, okay? And we started to look at this a little bit last week, but let's just take a look at this on button 2. So button number 2, when I click it, right, I get all this information about the click event. And most of it's not going to be terribly useful to me. But it's going to tell me the text of the button, which gives me an easy way to identify which button was pressed, and it also gives me the modifiers, right? So normally I'm just clicking with my left mouse, that's button 1, but I can hold shift and say modifiers equal shift plus button 1, or control shift, or control alt shift, and so on. Alright, so let's take a look at this toggle button. So I'll right click and I'll add an action performed. I can't just double click that one to jump to the code. So we'll come down here to action performed. And we'll look at this argument E that gets passed to it. So here's my toggle button. There's E, command equals toggle button, when equals this. And let me click it again. And let's look for some difference in here. No difference there. Okay, so so let's figure out if our button is pressed or not. Yeah, when is different, right? That's a timestamp. But I was looking for something that said whether the button was pressed or not pressed, and I'm not seeing that. So let's go to the documentation. So this is called with an action event E. And so action event, what do we have available here? Get action, get modifiers, get when, parameter string. So we may not be able to get this out of there. We may need to actually look at the object itself, which is a JToggle button. Is there an E.emitter kind of thing? That's what I'm kind of looking for, yeah. But I think it's going to be a property of the button itself. And what I'm doing here, right, is not exactly staged, right? I don't remember how to tell whether a toggle button is pressed or not. But I know that, there's two things that I have access to in my code. I have access to the event, which was passed, and I also have access to the object itself, the toggle button, new toggle button, right? And presumably in one of those is a method or a field, probably a method that will tell me the state of the object. Now you can Google, how do I tell when a toggle button is pressed, and probably get to your answer pretty quickly, right? Probably, Code Ranch or something or Stack Overflow will give you sample code. But it's worth getting comfortable with the Java documentation, the Oracle pages, right? Because then when you want to do something that you won't find an easy example for, like how do I make a hash table hashed on linked lists of rectangles, right? You'll be able to go through the Java doc and piece it together. So so what methods do we have here? Well, we're going to have to use methods from an inherited class. So get action, I'm looking for like get state or something. Get pressed icon, get selected, get text. Create toggle button with specified selected selection state. I will go to Stack Overflow in a moment. Is selected. That sounds promising. So is selected returns the state of the button. True if the toggle button is selected. False if it's not. All right. So let's run with that. So So our toggle button is toggle button new toggle button. Dot is selected. All right, so I'm just going to print out, let me get rid of this first one. Is selected equals, and we'll do the state of the toggle button, the is selected. And every time that you click the button, we will come down here because, you know, an action has been performed, and then we'll see what the state of that is. So let's run that. When I click it, it says selected is true. When I click again, it says it's false. So we can tie into these objects. All right, let's play with the text field. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to add event handlers. Let's do key and let's do key typed. And here I'm going to take advantage of this pop-up help. I'm just said arg0 dot, and now I have a list of methods that I can call. I'm just going to say get key character. So let's print out the get key character method from here. So I can do A, and there's an A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, and so on. And when I hit enter, it's putting out a new line, and so on and so forth. Now, when I hit things like Control and Shift, I'm not going to get a key response from that because I'm doing key typed. If I do key pressed, I'll be able to pick up keys. And if I paste stuff into here, right, what I'm seeing is the key code for Control V, which is how I'm pasting, right? So different things you can do with text fields. All right, we can also do something like, let's add an event handler for mouse. Let's say mouse entered. So I'll just go down here and I'll say system print line mouse entered the text area. And let's go back here and let's add another event handler for mouse, and we'll do mouse exited. And we'll say mouse left the text area. And so I'm going to run this, and I can move my mouse around and nothing happens until I go in the text field, and now I get a message saying mouse entered the text area. And as soon as I move the mouse outside, it tells me the mouse left. So even though I haven't clicked anything, haven't typed anything, right, I can notice when my mouse is pointing inside this field. I don't even have focus in here. If I start typing, I'm actually typing in that password field. Right? It's just picking up the mouse motion itself. And so there's lots of events we can add listeners for. So action performed in here, I believe, is when you hit an enter key that registers the action performed. Caret update, I think, will happen when you move the cursor forward or backward. We can call methods when the component is occluded by something else, or when it's re-exposed, or when it changes size, when it gets focus or loses focus, when you press a key, which is holding it down, when you release a key, which is letting it up, or when you type, which is the act of pressing and releasing, and they're all slightly different. Mouse, you can respond to clicking, entering, exiting, pushing a button, or releasing a button, just like keys. Mouse motion, you can move the mouse over and get an event, or you can drag something, so moving with the button pressed. We can pick up the mouse wheel, so the scroll wheel, right? And that's a fun one. Let's do a mouse wheel event. Let's just print out the value of arg0. So now I'm sitting over my mouse area, and I'm just going to scroll the mouse wheel down, and I get a mouse wheel event, right? And it tells me click count equals 1, right over here. Scroll amount equals 3, wheel rotation equals 1. Let me scroll in the opposite direction, and here wheel rotation was -1. And so while you're sitting in here, right, you can pick up scroll events, and you get to do whatever you choose, right, with these things. This is really just sort of giving you a front end, and then all of the stuff that you want to do in response to that comes out in here in this source code. All right, and you can also pick up events on this panel itself. So let's do a mouse motion. And this arg that we get past arg0 has getX and getY methods. Right, you can get all kinds of information from there, but let's just get XY coordinates. And now anywhere in this panel that I move my cursor, I'm jumping into my code, and I know where my mouse is positioned, and I can, respond to that accordingly. Now if I'm over a button, that doesn't happen anymore, okay, because the button is picking up that event. Over here, the text field is picking up that event, but when I'm just pointing over the panel itself, right, I'm picking up mouse events, and I don't even have to click anything. In fact, if I click and I move, I'm not picking up events, because now it's a mouse dragged event that's happening. But I could have separate code for doing, something in response to that. All right, so these are the building blocks. We will put these together and start looking at some interactions we can make tomorrow, and then we'll talk about PA3 after that. All right, I will see you next time.